Hello and welcome everybody to another attributed session to you, brought to you by us at Dream Data. As usual, I'm Stefan, and today I have a very special guest with me, which I think actually now that I do the math, I've been following just short of 10 years now. The guest today is you, Bill Macaitis. And if I think back, I actually think the way I found your name was at a blog post on Thomas
Mm,
Tungun's blog, where he wrote
yeah.
up a summary of how you laid out the marketing organization at Zendesk or something like that. And I've kind of been using that still as a blueprint for how to set up marketing organizations to this day. So I'll find that link later and then post under this event. But that really inspired me how to kind of organize a marketing organization. And then when I've been able to it, I've picked up articles with you and studied these, Bill. So thank you so much for all the inspiration.
Oh man, it's an honor to be here. Tomas is great. I think he was at Redpoint then. He's
Yes,
a
exactly.
really great VC. I think he's actually launched his own, firm now. And it was super fun. I remember when that guide came out, he was sitting in an event that I was at, and he kind of just really just kind of transcribed what I was speaking at the event, which was like, hey, how do you build this team and how do you, separate them and put them there? So that was a super fun one to be a part of.
That's super nice. And Bill, I know you for all the merits at Slack and Zendesk and Salesforce, but what are you up to nowadays on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I had a really amazing ride. I feel very fortunate to be part of like Salesforce and Zendesk and Slack. And after Slack, they eventually were IPO'd and acquired. It was like, what do I do next? And I just knew, like, as an operator, and as a CMO or anyone in marketing, like, it's just hard, right? Like, you have every other team in the organization thinks they're a marketer, right? They're all giving you advice. They're all questioning your data. They're all kind of critiquing. And I was just like, man, like, I just want to help other marketers out, And so I decided, like, hey, I'm going to become an advisor. Right now, I advise or am a board member for maybe about 6 or 7 different AI and SaaS companies. But really, I wanted to kind of democratize some of this data. And this is somewhat, we'll talk about the benchmark today, but I also just started doing videos. So I have a channel, SaaS CMO Pro. It's on YouTube, and I'll post the written content as well. If you want to check it out, just go to cmopro.com. All the info's there. But I just go into all these topics, like like how to hire people and what's the right org design and budgets and attribution, which we've talked about a lot, which I'm a big fan of, and content and how AI tools are leveraging it. So I just want to make it free so anybody could access it and just kind of be a resource. Because I just knew when I was coming up, like, I didn't really have that many mentors or just advisors or people that could just help me, like, as I figured out how to grow and scale the company. So anyways, that takes up most of my time right now.
Yeah, and super nice for all of us who still think we have stuff to learn, that you're at least sharing the insights that you've experienced during your career.
A lot of it's the pain too, the stuff where I've made horrible mistakes and I'm like, oh, I hope no one else will make this mistake. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, we all do mistakes. But Bill, actually, before we head into the meat of it, so when you talk about your career, SVP at Salesforce, then Zendesk CMO, and then Slack CMO, that like looks like a perfectly planned B2B SaaS CMO journey. Was it one big plan, or how did that actually come along?
Yeah, no big plan. I like to think that, but no, really. And before those three, I was all on consumer side.
Yeah.
I did a gaming startup right out of college. I didn't even know there were things called VCs that would give you money, right? Like, we were like in the Midwest, and I was eating ramen noodles. I had no money at all. So, in a great way though, it really forced me, and I was kind of in charge of the business side, to just think about, like, hey, how do you grow these startups very capital efficiently, right? Without having a ton of money. And so we really dived into, like, early freemium models. We dived into, like, virality loops. We dived into, like, early PLG stuff, partnerships, press, SEO, just because we had to, right? We just didn't have literally any budget, right?
Yeah.
And we grew that to 10 million members. We sold it. And I worked for a lot more other consumer type companies, IG Entertainment, that we bought Rotten Tomatoes and had a bunch of consumer ones there. Then News Corp bought us out, and I ran a centralized marketing team for all their properties, everything from, like, Wall Street Journal or Fox Sports or American Idol. And then it was kind of crazy. Like, I was, kind of like, all right, I've been there like 4 years. What do I do next? And I got a call from Salesforce of all people, right? And it was like, wait, what is Salesforce? And I just kind of researched it. I'm like, this is kind of cool, because I always liked more modern go-to-market playbooks, and they kind of invented the SaaS model, which totally disrupted how you bought and sold software. And so, it was kind of a big leap going from consumer to B2B, and I had to learn a bunch of new terms. I remember, like, at one point I was at a meeting and someone was like, "Oh, they're a suspect," and I'm like, "What's a suspect? Like, did they commit a crime or something?" And he's like, "No, man, that's like someone that's hasn't converted into a customer yet," and all these acronyms, right? Like, BRDs and MQLs, and I had no idea what any of that was, but it's kind of fun. Sometimes just life presents opportunities. I've been a big believer, just try to be opportunistic, try to take them. And really, for me, Zendesk and Slack, the reason I went there was I love the culture of both of them. I really love the CEOs, but the big one was they hadn't built out their marketing function yet. And I was just more of a, coming from consumer to B2B, one thing that always kind of stuck in the back of my head was it just felt really dated. Like, a lot of the playbooks on marketing growth were really old school, right? Like, all outbound, all, SDR cold calling. Marketing had a very limited role. The brands themselves were really boring. And I was just like, God, we should be using some much more modern. And so going to Zendesk and Slack, like, I got to kind of build out those teams relatively from scratch. They're usually either like 0 or 1 or 2 people that were there. And I didn't have to do like a massive change management exercise. So for me, that was super exciting.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many questions already I want to ask you. I'll take your bet on this now, and then we'll head into the benchmark section.
Okay.
But, I'll start with the headline. Do you think outbound is dying, or outbound as we know it? Meaning that you have your salespeople just call people, book meetings, or just massive spam emails to everybody, hoping that email. You can probably hear where I'm thinking at the moment. Yeah. And Apple just released this like call scanning feature, right? Where like, they'll block calls from people you don't know and stuff like that. And now it just triggered me, as you said, that you were going into organizations that were sales-led. But is that very old school sales-led actually a possible motion today? Or how do you see that development of the cold outbound motion today?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's dead. It's definitely had a resurgence almost. And I think it's almost like email allowed anyone to send out a message for relatively little cost. I think the AI SDRs are having a very similar effect, right? Where you can just mass cold outreach to so many companies. And, I don't know, like I'm really torn on this. The optimist on me is like, oh, wow, at least these will be personalized. Yeah. And I've gotten personalized emails, but at the same time, like the personalized emails I get, I can totally tell when they're AI written. Yeah. They're like, oh, you are the owner of SaaS CMO Pro and you like gardening. And by the way, we're selling this product, right? And I'm like, who, like, no one kind of says that. They're kind of just reaching out and trying to personalize it. So I don't know. Like, I feel like we're going to have this period where we're just going to see a flood of new outbound, and everybody's inboxes, voicemails are going to get, just overloaded, and, the tools will adapt to it. So we'll see. It's still like, I think cold outreach maybe has its role, but there's kind of this philosophical, are you more of an inbound or outbound type person? And there's capital efficiency type concerns there. And, it's going to be interesting with the AI tools and how they're going to impact it.
Yeah, I'm following it tightly at the moment, whether we're just going into this saturation where everybody's doing and then nothing works, or we'll actually reach a peak of personalization where the personalization do work.
Yeah. It's, it's one of those, like, there are certain aspects that I think in AI SDR totally makes sense, right? Like the fact that we used a lot of manpower to do female power, to do the qualification in the lead scoring. I think that doesn't make sense, right? That you can use a good AI engine for that. The fact that we used to use SDRs to do all the scheduling, like, that doesn't make sense now, right? There's great tools that can do that. So, I think it's a really powerful tool, but, you have to be careful with this, right? Like, I'm a big believer in a customer-centric experience. You want to get people to recommend you, because in that recommendation is based off all these little micro experiences you have. And if you're still spamming at the end of the day and people have kind of like a yucky experience, right? Like, that's tough. That kind of pollutes the entire brand, and it really hurts your word of mouth.
That's very true, Bill. And I think that's actually one of the very early articles I read about you as well, was that this kind of the brand is the sum up of all the micro experiences you do have with a with a brand. So you stay consistent on what works here, Bill. That's good to hear. Bill, but if we change chapter a little bit and then switch to benchmarks. So you've been part of this quite big report that Benchmark put out. But before we head into that, can you reflect a little bit upon how much you've been using benchmarks in your past full-time roles? Is it a tool that you've been using, or when did you use them, and what did you use them for?
Yeah, I always, there's a really big data part of me personally, right? My dad was an engineer, and I think it's just kind of especially you get in all these marketing conversations, and it's all these other, again, we talked about this earlier, right? Everyone's a marketing expert at your company, your CEO is, your board is, all the functional teams, even though they've maybe never done marketing, they're all experts, right? Yeah. And I never liked a lot of these ivory tower discussions oh, well, we should have this on the homepage, or we should have that, right? And I was always well, why don't we just test it? Let the users decide which message resonates with them versus us thinking we know better than them, right? And so there's a part of me that always wanted to have more data. So I'm a big fan of what you guys are building, and Dream Data and attribution, and just in general, just getting more data. And I think benchmarks are a really big part of that, right? I think when you're leading at marketing teams, individual functions, or even as an IC, it's kind of really important to know well, what's happening in my space? What are competitors doing? How much budget should I have? As an advisor, that's a really popular question I get. I literally got it yesterday. It was a new AI startup. She was awesome, but she's I don't know, how much budget do marketing teams normally get, right? And that's a big question, right? And a lot of times when you don't have any data and you go to the CEO, well, I think we should have $2 million of budget, right? They're well, where'd you get that? You pulled it out, right? So I think having benchmarks are really important. In the past, it was always a bit frustrating for me because there weren't that many publicly available. The ones that were, a lot of times came from these, third-party analyst firms, and a lot of times you had to pay to get them $50,000 or $100,000. And it was just tough. And so, I felt really fortunate. I knew Ray Reich at Benchmark. He does a lot of these individual benchmarks, but we kind of collaborated together along with, Ray, Carolou, John Miller, from Marketo days. And we kind of collaborated, and hey, well, how would we design the survey? What questions would we ask as, CMOs? And we're also hey, we want to democratize this. Can we make this free, right? Can we just make it so anybody can access it, right? And he was really cool with that, and as part of that, we compiled it. We reached out to 300 different CMOs. We got a bunch of great responses from, both AI and SaaS companies, and just with a lot of these core questions around budgets, channels, AI. And so that was kind of how the survey came about.
That's super nice. And maybe just for the source information when we listen to these benchmarks. Now it's not your company, obviously, Benchmark, Bill, but can you just say 1 or 2 lines about what Benchmark is?
Yeah, sure. So Benchmark is, funded by Ray Reich. And basically the idea is hey, if you want to get custom data on your own customers, right? Maybe you want to run a survey and you want to have help with that. I remember I was advising another startup, and they just kind of want to know hey, awareness type stuff, right? Do people even know about us, right? We've talked about this in the past. I think, and we'll talk about this actually in the benchmark guide, the metrics marketers tracked are really slanted towards all funnel based metrics, right? Leads and pipeline, and rightfully so. It's a really important metric, but very little were any on brand metrics, right? Aided recall or awareness or sentiment. And so a firm like Ray, they can go out and they can do a custom survey to your audience, to a third party, not even that aren't even, your prospects. They can try to get unique data sets. And they're really great with that. Yeah. So Ray was awesome to work with.
Oh, super cool. It's just good to know what's behind the information that we're we're talking about here.
Yeah, totally.
I think that the report crosses more than 100 pages, so we don't have to go into every single benchmark in there today. But
yeah, we would not have time.
No, absolutely. But if we wanted to, I think we should just kind of cherry pick some of the points that you really liked in there. And but before you answer, Bill, I'll just put Lisa's just asking. Where can I download the report? And I'll make sure to, I don't know if you remember the URL, but I'll make sure to insert it at least where you can download it.
Yeah, the easiest way is actually just reach out to me on LinkedIn, Bill Macaitis, send me a message, and then I can send you the report from there. So yeah, it's super easy. We have both. I can send you the links to, we have a summary version. If you want the 100-page version, there's like a 40-page version, which has the summary, or you can get the full, like, I think it's like 137 pages or something like that. So I'm happy to send that to you. And also we can connect too. I always love talking to fellow marketers and leaders. So, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll make sure you get it.
That's great. Okay, Bill. So when you think back on these benchmarks here, can you remember one or two things from it that kind of still kind of sits with you that we can start off with?
Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe it's all right. Maybe I'll share my screen and I can show people the report itself. Yeah, you got it. Okay. All right. So here is this was everybody that kind of worked on the report here. And let me see. Can you see it okay, Stefan?
I can see it okay. So just go ahead.
All right, cool. So I changed my cursor last night. I enlarged it and made it red. Ooh, so hopefully you guys can see that, because I was like, I need it like a little pointer here. But this was the team on it. 300 companies, again, kind of diverse ACV that we did. One of the first interesting ones that I thought was just the pricing model that people were using. So one of the big trends that I saw that was interesting was outcome-based pricing was now 8%. And, so outcome-based pricing is this idea of like, hey, you price your AI product based on an actual outcome generated. So like for customer support, you could say like Intercom or Salesforce are trying to do this where it's like, hey, maybe it's like $1 per successful resolution, right? Like of a ticket, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you're, a sales intelligence product and you're going to help generate more pipeline. Well, okay, well, for each, 100,000 a pipeline, we get a percentage of that, right? It's just an idea of like you're starting to charge by outcome, and I'm starting to see that a lot more. And even with the AI companies I work with, a lot of times I'll recommend if they can, build it on outcome based. So I thought that was interesting.
Is it the same as value-based pricing, Bill? Excuse me if I don't know the terms.
Yeah, historically, for SaaS, there was subscription-based pricing, and that's, per user. That was kind of how Salesforce started, and that was the model was built on. Then you started to see, usage-based pricing. And that's still, in this one, subscription was still the dominant. Outcome, there's a lot, and again, this is hard because everybody uses different terms for different things. I haven't heard the value one. It might be, right? It's just basic idea of like you push the metric a little bit further down in the funnel.
Yeah, it does make sense with these AIs where if you resolve a ticket from a customer, well, that's nice to pay for that, because then you know what you're getting when you're paying for it.
Yeah, and the cool thing with the big trend I'm seeing too is like obviously AI is taking over everywhere, right? But at the same time, there are usually 5, 10, 20, in some cases like 50 competitors in your space, right? I'm working with a customer support AI company, really great, but oh my God, there's so many of them out there, right? And so having like a more modern pricing model really helps you reduce risk, right? Like when you go to people, it's not like, oh, you have to charge all this up front or charge for all these seats. It's like, hey, you only charge based on the outcome. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool one. We'll kind of see where that plays out as far as different companies embracing that.
Very nice.
And let's see here. I'm going to kind of just scroll through here really quickly. I'll kind of hit the key ones. This was the next big one, and I thought was kind of interesting was you have marketing budgets. Like what should they be, right? Like literally, I had that question yesterday. And so for anyone that wants like a little bit of like hard data as they are, going to their CEO or their board or like, hey, what should it be? So the average, and this is kind of like B2B marketing for SaaS and AI, the budgets went up to 10%. So for everyone saying like, oh, budgets are down, like their actually marketing budgets are up. We saw it as high as 20%, as low as 5%.
Is it revenue? Sorry, Bill.
Yes, this is a percentage of revenue, right? Yeah. So, hey, you have ARR 100 million. All right, well, you should, roughly have about a $10 million budget, right?
Yeah.
We did see for companies that are more PLG, right? They tend to have a higher budget because there's not really like a big sales team behind it.
Yeah,
for companies that have sales teams, they are, it tends to be a little bit of a lower budget because more budget goes to sales. And in general, the bigger this is the next one, the bigger the company gets, the lower the marketing budgets tend to be. So that's kind of another interesting finding. If you're over 250 million, you might drop down to being like 4% of kind of being the average here. These are the highs and the lows of each one.
Do you think that is because they struggle to find efficiency as they get large?
Yeah, I think so. You know, a lot of times you're kind of cherry picking the best channels and the best
Yeah,
keywords
that's
and the best
exactly.
audiences, right? And like, well, we need more. And it's like, that's why sometimes it's hard to explain to. I think, you know, I've had this conversation with board members and other people too, is like, hey, every incremental user I'm getting costs a little more, right? Because
Mm,
I've already gone for the lowest hanging fruits in a lot
yeah,
of cases. Or at some case, you know, at some point with SEM, you're going to hit every keyword, right? There's no
yeah,
more keywords you can advertise on, right? So you're just bidding up
absolutely.
your own auction.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. Other ones in the marketing side, like what teams get the budgets? It's still predominantly demand gen and events get the biggest chunk of it.
I was actually
And
surprised to see events were this big.
yeah. So, you know, events are still, you know, for B2B, they're still a mainstay for a lot of different companies. And you know, it's just, you know, you kind of see that reflected in these stats.
I think you could probably all do a report just on how to utilize events as a growth tactics, and how to do them efficiently and how to do them inefficiently. It's,
Yeah, I mean, they're their own little world, right? You
yeah,
know, and I learned a ton about events at Salesforce where, excuse me, we had this massive user conference.
yeah,
But we also did like, you know, little city tours. There's, you know, meet and greets. There's, you know, CTO dinners. There's third party events. There's such a
yeah,
crazy mix of what you can do. But you know, events are tough too. On the flip side, they cost a lot.
yeah.
And
Some of
anyone
the
that's run
booths.
an event, yeah, you know how much like it takes a ton of people time, right?
Yeah,
Like it's a huge tax, not just on the events team, but all these other teams need to contribute to it too. The messaging, you know, a lot of times you need to run demand gen to build the audience to go to the events. So, you know, there's pros and cons on all these, but just kind of interesting. So, you know, you kind of know, hey, what your peers like where they're spending their dollars.
mm, yeah.
For people that wanted like, hey, you know, how big is my marketing team, or what are the traditional roles associated with this? This was kind of a cool slide here where you can still kind of see like as you get bigger, you obviously hire more people early on, very much generalist, right? As far as you know, you
Yeah,
have one person in each of these teams, and marketing does tend to be very specialized, right? We even early on, we tend to do like a kind of a specific functional role. As you get bigger, the biggest teams are demand gen, product marketing, and events. And I've kind of seen that in my personal life or the companies I've advised.
yeah.
Growth marketing is becoming a big function by itself, kind of following out there, and then marketing ops. But yeah, kind of interesting to kind of see where the teams fell.
I'm reading through thinking about our team and the different roles we
Yeah,
have there.
and again, like these aren't saying, hey, you should do this, right? This is just saying, hey, this is what 300 CMOs and on average how they're kind of divvying out their teams. And so sometimes it's good for data, you know, to use to justify like, hey, we should have this team, or you
Yeah.
know, this is where people are investing, right? Like that's the whole point of the benchmarks.
Yeah, like you have the benchmark, and then you need to think about what's working in our company or what's not working at the moment. Should we deploy a full-time resource trying to fix it, or should we double down on what's working at the moment instead?
Totally. Yeah, and again, like reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want this. I know some of these are kind of eye charts here. There's a lot of stuff going on, but this one, the takeaway here is basically like, hey, if you do have a sales team, which a lot of, you know, B2B SaaS and AI companies will have, you know, you on average you're going to get 1/3 of the total sales and marketing budget, right? So that's something you know, sometimes you need to fight for, right? Like if the sales budget starts getting, you know, 70, 80, 90%, right?
Yeah,
Like this is another benchmark you can use to kind of like ballpark, like, hey, how much should the marketing team be getting?
interesting. Huh.
Cool. So kind of moving on, you know, the growth rates, I'll try to go through these a little quickly. This was a really interesting one. Basically, the percentage of revenue that was allocated to marketing budgets. So basically, the faster the company was growing, you know, the more the marketing budget was, right?
Yeah.
So we saw this all as the marketers, like, oh, this is awesome, right? But then it's like, oh, you know, is this a chicken and the egg thing, right? Is this just a
Yeah,
company that's
completely.
doing really well, has more money to give to marketing, or vice versa? But hey, as a marketer, I'll just go with, hey, you know, when you see higher budgets, you tend to grow faster. So again, another thing you can kind of use as you tend to go out
I guess
there.
it's also like a matter of, if you think about that consumer index that the World Economic Forum puts out, like the more optimistic and positive you are about the future, the more you trust it, and then consumers will spend more money, and companies that are at a
Totally.
good growth rate, they will believe that the future will be even greater.
Yeah. And again, we can't, at this point, really, if you're a data scientist, you can't argue cause and effect here. But it was an interesting finding. The other thing that kind of caught me by surprise was, I think we're so used to reading the headlines and, on a podcast, or wow, this company's growing at 300%, and this company's growing at 500%, and this one's growing at 400%. Guys, a lot of the companies, most companies we talk to are growing at like 10, 20, 30, 40%. Like that's that, right? So don't, beat yourself up too much if you're not in that, we tripled our revenue this year. Obviously, there still are those companies that are great, and it's good to look at too, but also, sometimes I think it's like, social media, it's like, oh, everyone looks good and sounds good and they're growing fast and everything's great. And it's like, well, actually, like these are more kind of normal growth rates, at least for, the companies that we had seen.
The LinkedIn feed does that to you when you start comparing.
Yeah, totally.
Like crazy.
Everyone's awesome.
Everybody is successful on LinkedIn. All the time.
Everyone's successful. And it does bring up a good point too. I was going to say, A, I mentioned before, if you want the report, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to send it over to you. Or B, at some point we're going to do this again for next year, for 2026. So I'll usually, follow me on LinkedIn. I'll usually put out a post. And if you want to contribute to this is super helpful, right? Like, obviously the more, surveys we get filled out, the more we can get better data. And again, we're just sharing it for free for everyone. This is more of like a grassroots effort. So, kind of keep an eye for that.
Yeah. Very nice.
Cool. We talked about that. Most of the budget goes to demand gen and events. This was kind of an interesting one, like, where the budget's going towards people, programs, or technology. And it was kind of interesting, like, as you get, the bigger you get, the more it's going to programs. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like at some point, if you're running a $5 million ad campaign, you don't need $5 million worth of people to help manage that, right? Like you get some economies of scale there. We did see the tech start to go down over time, which was kind of interesting. But it's kind of interesting to see like where the budgets are going as far as like people, programs, or tech.
I haven't actually done this math for our marketing department.
Yeah,
live confessions here, but I would actually should try and do that and see how it compares.
Yeah, there's all these efficiency metrics, right? Like, revenue per employee for the company. I know at Salesforce we used to look at that a lot. Like, hey, what is our people program split, right? Like sometimes I think it was like, you're going to be a big hiring spree. And you're like, well, do we actually have too many people relative to our budget? So it's just another way that sometimes companies will slice the data.
And when we speak about efficiency, I think also now in these AI times, you should really force yourself to, like, before you hire another person, can we actually, how much of the current stuff that we're doing can we automate and gain more efficiency out of rather than just adding another headcount?
Yeah, I mean, that's a deep, potentially dark discussion, right? Where a lot of companies are, there are new heads. It's just, all right, find an AI tool that will do what you're doing. And, what I do see too, another trend, and this is a little bit, adjacent to the survey, but there's so many AI companies coming out, and a lot of them, there's like they call it like the lean AI movement where, how can you get, I was talking to another company yesterday and they basically hit about, roughly about 20 million ARR with, I think, like 13 people.
Holy moly. Okay.
Yeah. And that's insane. But what that means at the same time is a lot of these pure play AI companies that are coming out are selling products in your space that their costs are, 1/10, 1/100th of your cost, right? And that's going to put huge pricing pressure on the space, So if you're a consumer of these products, great, right? The prices are going to be coming down, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on companies to cut those costs, right? And that pressure comes from the board, right? They're like, hey, why are we even hiring people? Why should we, not just using AI tools? So even more important than ever to kind of just, be able to provide value, to know these AI tools, because that pricing pressure is going to, push down to headcount eventually as well.
Absolutely. Bill, Lisa's asking here, I think it fits pretty well. Did you ask the survey participants about the reporting structures? Like, who do the CMOs report to nowadays? And if it's not included, then what do you typically see out there?
Yeah, we did not include that one. And that's great, by the way. So another reason, like, if you're in LinkedIn, hit me up. Also say, hey, well, would you like to see in the next survey, right? Again, this is just for people that are, trying to work on this on the side and send out these surveys. But no, we didn't ask that one. That's a great question. And I think reporting structure is always fascinating, right? Like, who does the CMO report into? I've, historically, like where I've seen it is where if you are more of a PLG type company, usually there's a CMO type role and it reports directly to the CEO. If you are in a sales organization, a lot of times there will be a CRO, which tends to be more of a salesperson, to be honest, right? And the marketing reports into them. Now, like my background was a little different. When I was CMO, I reported to the CEO, and at Slack, I actually took on a CRO role where I led marketing, sales, success, and support, and reported to the CEO. But that was kind of a unique one where we wanted to have all the customer facing teams under one leader so we could have consistency in what that experience yielded. But yeah, you see a lot of different reporting structures now.
It's probably also, that probably worked because it was a PLG company, right? That you could have the CRO being the marketing leader because there's not as many salespeople to manage as in a traditional sales-led org.
Yeah, and it's kind of a philosophical one now, right? What moves the needle more? Is it the marketing or sales, right? And I think, in a weird way, I always thought, marketing is just automated sales. Like we're doing things at scale, right? So I don't know. It's just an interesting one. Sometimes you have a COO that you'll report into. Tech is kind of like different where a lot of times these startups, you have a technical founder, right? And sometimes they like the go-to-market stuff, but a lot of times they don't. And they're just looking for one person to kind of lead up all those functions, right? Or they'll, give it to the COO so they don't have to deal with it. They can just focus on the product. So you always see, like, I'm always surprised with the orgs, not only who marketing reports to, but how these marketing orgs are built. Like if you read different content and stuff, like I built it a very unique way. A lot of people have built it totally different, right? There's not one standard playbook on how you build your teams. And I think now with all these AI tools coming out, like it's going to, again, like radically change, like how do we build these orgs? When we do have humans, what are the roles? Are they generalists? Do they look for the overall experience? They look at the overall journey. How do these AI tools work together? Consistency, brand out, but there's so many like factors there. And I think personally, like it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think about saw Jason Lemkin, that founder of SaaStr, writing about that the CRO sometimes is just it's a dream for a VC, for a CEO, just to say, I just have to speak to that one CRO and then he fixes the rest. But in fact, it might be counterproductive because maybe you actually do want like a sales leader and a marketing leader who thinks very differently about how you should do things. And you should actually encourage these two strongly opinionated people to having to argument for why they need the resources to get a better outcome rather than thinking that you could get the outcome from just one individual.
Absolutely. It's a great point, Stefan. And, personally, I've always thought we shouldn't just default into doing things how we've done them, right? And I think for B2B organizations, a lot of them still, even on software, tend to just do, well, we did this in my last company, or this is how it's always been. There's always been a salesperson leading, the go-to-market teams. And I just think like that's changing, right? You have all these new models. Certainly you have product-led growth. You have product-led sales. You have hybrids. You have obviously the SOG type companies, but how people discover, buy software, and even what marketing's role is, right? Like I've talked about that in the past. Like I don't understand like why usually like for marketing teams, like 95% of their energy goes to net new prospects when we're really good at also helping close deals once they're in the funnel. And we're also really good at like running campaigns to existing customers to expand and buy more, right? And those are all like revenue outputs, but a lot of times we kind of get pigeonholed into, oh, you're just about leads, right? And so, like I think like a lot of ways, like we need to challenge these and, have these, good, thoughtful discussions with the board and with the founders as to what is the ideal layout and what are the ideal goals.
Yeah, really good, Ben. Really, really good.
Good stuff here. I know we're 8:36.
Time is flying, Bill. So
time is flying. I'm getting a couple more here.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier. PLG companies do tend to have a little bit more of the revenue. So you can kind of see here, like the budgets are a little bit bigger. They allocate more to programs. Attribution, I could not go through this slide if I'm talking to Dream Data, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a huge attribution nerd too, so I love this stuff. So this
Maybe,
was both.
maybe you can just say, Bill, why you have been kind of interested in the topic of attribution in your marketing roles.
I've always, really, to be honest with you, Stefan, I got into attribution because I hated politics.
Yeah.
I did. I hated like all these decisions being made in ivory towers without any data. The teams that had the, savviest political functional leaders tended to get the most budget. It wasn't based on real data. It was just, I don't know, it's just crap. It just sucked. I didn't like that, and I just wanted to, democratize that. And I think attribution, although difficult, and I know for a lot of marketers that are more on, are you a creative or a quant? For the creatives, like it's kind of a little hard. It's a little bit difficult, like all these different flavors of attribution and ways to get it. But I just always thought it was important. Like we need to know this, we need to know it and we need to tell a story. And I've seen too many board decks that have really bad data in it that are not telling the correct story. So obviously love what you guys are doing at Dream Data. And I think more companies need to kind of just invest the time and energy into the attribution side.
Yeah, I see it very similarly. I think two things. One thing is that you can only spend your dollar one time. So why not spend that dollar where you get the most efficiency out of it? And at the same time, as a marketer, I also just want to know what's working and what's not working, so I can focus my attention over to these projects where I know stuff is working.
Absolutely, right. And I think, look, practically, for those that are CMOs or those that are becoming marketing leaders or aspire to, you will get asked these questions, right? When you're in the board meeting, like, okay, what channels are performing the best, right? Like what is working, what isn't? And when you can't answer them, I think that sometimes where marketing will get a bad rap, right? Where it'll be like, why are we giving you $20 million? You just wasted it, or you spent it and nothing happened. And so attribution is a big part of that. So at the same time, though, kind of getting back to the slide, like, I was a little saddened where you still see first and last touch used quite often, right? And so the real quick on why I'm not a big fan of first and last touch is that, like, one of the things I discovered when I was at Salesforce, I kind of built our own attribution model. At the time, like Salesforce, security was number one for SaaS. We were still trying to prove out the SaaS model. And it was kind of interesting. Like when I was there, like we had an InfoSec team that really was super hard to use a third-party tool and give them our data, because there was always a fear of like, hey, they might not be able to hack into Salesforce, but if they hack into a third-party tool, they might have a vector in. Yeah. Right. And so I was like, okay, well, I just have to build this ourselves. And one of the things I found, and by the way, I don't recommend that. Go with someone, unless you're going to sell the product, like just let someone else do it, like let Dream Data do it or someone else. But one thing I found was that these, we started tracking all the journeys, and what we found is like people took a long time before they would become a lead, right? It would sometimes be 5, 10, 20 touches before they literally became a lead, maybe filled out that form. And that might be, 3 months. And then there might be another like 6 months and another 10 interactions before you close the deal. And then it might be another 20 interactions before they expand. And I was just always like, why would we give all this credit or all the credit to the very first thing or the very last thing, right? Like it's a journey. Like our goal as marketers are to educate and nurture people. So we should be having a lot of like these touches. So
we put out that was surprising to me. We put out some benchmarks earlier this year for the average customer journey amongst our customers, and the average journey from first touch to closed one was 211 days.
Oh my God, that's amazing!
And then I think 62 touches or something like that. So judging the book by one of those 62 touches is a very slim way of
totally. And it's fascinating, like Stefan, like you even mentioned the early days, like, oh, like I started following Bill like 10 years ago, right? And I saw him on, someone else put out a blog post, right? And then maybe you saw me a couple of other places, and then we finally start talking. It's like, oh, it's great, cool, both good guys. But that's a lot of times it happens with your company, right? So anyways, like I could spend an hour on like, hey, how I think we need to get better at attribution. The good news is I think as companies mature, they do start to lean more into multi-touch. And obviously there's a lot of different modeling out there. There's mixed media modeling, there's multi-stage attribution, there's, just using control groups and different methodologies. And we won't go into all that, but, I would just say like, hey, if you are, first or last touch, it might be a good time to re-explore because you can actually really have a competitive edge over your competitors too. Like the channel data you'll get when you only use first or last touch is very different than when you look at how all the touches layer together and you look at the AI and the regression models. Like you start to understand like how important these nurturing, educating channels are that are in the middle.
Do you think it's a resource question, Bill, that they think it's too hard to do, and then let's just do something simple? Or
I think a lot of times people don't even realize it, right? Like it's just all the reports are being generated, right? Because that's like I'll see these board decks because I'm on some boards and I'm helping out as an advisor, and you'll just see the board deck and I'll be like, oh, here's the channels that are producing, right? But a lot of times there's no slide that says like, well, what was the attribution model? What are you using for that, right? Yeah. And that's why sometimes you can give a very deceiving slide. I'm sure there's politics too. Sometimes like, we'd even see it at Salesforce. Sometimes it was like you get into tagging wars, right? To try to who tagged it correctly to get the credit for that deal, right? Yeah. And one channel gets the entire credit for it. So I don't know. I just think more education needs to happen on it. That's why like I'm always excited when I have a chance to talk with you guys because we just get to raise the general awareness of how important attribution is.
Yeah. Cool.
So to wrap it up, the last one I'll do here is just the biggest metrics. Yeah, that people use. I know we're kind of at the end of time here. So we asked basically just like, hey, what are you measuring in marketing, right? And kind of how I alluded to earlier, the biggest measurements by far are these funnel-based metrics. So when I talk about funnel, I'm talking about like, hey, leads, visits, pipe, ARR, MQLs. Or cost metrics associated with those, like cost per opportunity, pipeline conversion. The nice thing is like I am seeing we started to see more of a shift from just pure leads, right? Which people are using to really like, hey, is it pipeline generated? So I think that's great. And even the leads one was MQLs, which theoretically there's some qualification before you send it over. So some good stuff that we're starting to see more metrics that are further down the funnel. And I've always been a big advocate of that, right? Like don't create this big fight with sales where you just give them a lead and then they say, hey, you're in charge of the rest. Like, hey, both teams should share these metrics and share the entire funnel.
That's actually true, but I didn't actually think about it that way. That it's clearly people have moved their attention from like collecting emails to at least generating pipeline.
Yeah,
maybe next year more of the efficiency metrics will follow along then.
Yeah, and so on the flip side, I was a little disappointed just because I'm an advocate too. Like, hey, funnel metrics have their place and they're important, but I really didn't see many, if any, brand metrics. So there was just awareness at the end here. But for those, and this is me just kind of coming from the B2C side where we religiously track this, right? Our aided recall or unaided recall, our sentiment, share voice, share conversation. There's a ton of good brand metrics out there. If you're ever interested in that stuff, I think I did a video just on brand metrics for the SaaS CMO Pro. So you can go to CMOpro.com.
There's whether you could drop a few of the brand metrics, but go to Bill's YouTube channel.
Go to the YouTube channel, SaaS CMO Pro, or you can just go to CMOpro.com. That's my website, and you can kind of get links to all the channels and stuff like that. But I've done in-depth videos just on marketing metrics. Different types. Another big category outside of awareness metrics is like PLG type metrics. And I do think marketing is a big part of PLG. So things like daily active users, things like product qualified leads, right? Like different ways to run these funnels and how you sell time to value. And then you have experience-based metrics, right? Like, hey, if you want word of mouth, right? Like the most cost-efficient way to grow, it's important to track, are people having good experiences with you, right? So like net promoter score or CSAT or, how long it takes your web homepage to load. Like those are all like really good experience metrics. And I'm hoping as time goes and as these models change, right? Like we see that represented more, but for now it's very funnel heavy.
I always love how holistic you think about marketing, Bill, that it's not just a funnel, it's experiences, it's brand, it's like you're surveying your colleagues about what they think about marketing as well, where on a day-to-day basis, you can kind of go into your little silo and just think marketing in one simple pipeline generating way.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, and look, there's awesome people out here. I've talked with Ais. I've seen her in the comments there. That's awesome. Thanks for joining. Lisa, there's a lot of people that are asking the same type of questions. And I think the mere fact that, you're joining this webinar and you're interested in, this type of data, I think that gives you a huge leg up. But these are good conversations. And a lot of times too, what I found is the tech founders, they don't know what your metric should be, right? They don't know marketing, right? So it's a good opportunity to educate them, nurture them on, hey, these are different types of categories. And I found like the companies or startups I work with that only measure funnel metrics, they tend to get sometimes caught in a very like short-term cycle.
Yeah.
It's always like, oh, we need more leads. We have to get more pipeline for this quarter, right? And so everything you're investing in is just stuff that gives you a short-term boost. It's like, like you're just eating sugar all the time. Like, oh, I got to get this. And, sometimes the other metrics encourage you to do more long-term actions, incentivize you to think about what a good experience looks like, how to build the brand to stand out. And those are things that always pay off in the first week or the first month, but in the long run can really help with your pipe and your leads and all that. But, the metrics drive behavior. They drive incentives for everyone in the organization.
Bill, you're a marketing encyclopedia. But if you have to give I think we're running out of time, Bill. So just want to ask you, if you were to give like a 2025 timely market the B2B marketing advice for the people listening in, what's kind of the first thing that comes to mind for you?
I think I've always said this with marketing, with go-to-market, you just need to be opportunistic, and also just realize that, hey, every year the strategy changes, right? And I just think like right now we are at like a seminal moment in marketers' lives with AI coming out, and how we're going to use this and leverage it and get that 10x, that 20x leverage. So like I think just like, hey, embrace it, use it. Yes, some of these tools are not perfect. Yes, they will hallucinate. Yes, they will do some weird things, but I think the risk of not using it, your competitors are most likely going to do it. You'll get outflanked, or just from a career perspective, right? Everyone else knows the tools, you don't, right? That's really hard. So I think just try to be opportunistic there.
Yeah. How would you quantify this AI? How big is this AI? Is it as big as when we got social media, or is it as big as when we got the internet? Or how big a change, how seismic is this right now, you think?
I mean, I think it's as big as when we got internet, right? I think it's way bigger than social. I guess part of it's like, it was really interesting. So when I did my advisory business for a long time, I was working with a little bit later stage companies like Series B, C, D. And I recently shifted. I work with now seed and Series A, because I just think like that's where the AI companies are coming out, right? They're all being born right now as we speak. So I wanted to really be a part of that. And when you start diving into it, there are so many startups coming out. Literally, I've seen, when you start diving into the seed, VCs and how much they're investing, it is so much money coming in. And every single facet, every single topic I've talked about so far, there is an AI solution coming out that does just that in marketing, right? So, the models have a lot to improve on, right? I think the thinking logic mode helped that a lot. There's, the deep thinking mode. And they're still going to hallucinate. They're still going to have some errors, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity to come out and think about same thing like we talked about earlier, like the whiteboard. Like the whole reason I love joining these younger companies was like they hadn't built out marketing yet, right? You could build it in a really fun way. In the same way, like all these AI companies and anyone listening to this is like, hey, how would you redo marketing if you had AI natively built into it, right? Like how would you build your content? How would you run your campaigns? How would you think about your branding, your message? It's just like all these things. And I don't know all the answers, right? I'm learning just like everybody else, but just kind of leaning into it, I think is really important.
There's no way around it. We gotta get starting to master that AI. Bill, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I know it's a bit early in California still. If people were to just want to talk more with you or learn more from you, what's the path they should take?
Yeah, and I apologize. There were some really good questions in the chat there, and I know we weren't able to hit all of them, but I'm always happy to talk with you guys. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, Bill Macaitis. We can always connect. Send a message to me there. Like I said, if you do want to hear more about my musings on marketing, attribution, brand, all that stuff, go to cmopro.com. That's my website. Again, I create a ton of content. It's all free. There's no charge or anything. I just wanted to help other marketers avoid some of the scar tissue that I had to go through. Hopefully learn some things and have a really successful and fruitful career.
Wonderful, Bill. Thank you so much. And to everybody who's listening, thank you so much for spending the time with Bill and I. We really appreciate it. And do subscribe to Attributed where you listen to podcasts, because then you'll get more conversation. And perhaps Bill comes back next year and you'll get that